Almost 400 reviews and we haven't done a single classic film noir. That's gonna change now.
Now look, if you don't leave this room at once, I'll have to call the manager.
I wouldn't do that.
Then get out! Excuse it, please.
Servus Freunde, my name is Jimmy Cage and so far I haven't talked about a single classic film noir, which has to change today because it's one of my absolute favorite genres. Though calling it a genre can be slightly problematic, it's more a certain style of filmmaking, and it's also a term that was applied retrospectively. Now I can only give you a very brief introduction at this point, but I think it's important since 1947's Ride the Pink Horse is the first film noir that I present to you. The term film noir, which is French for black film or dark film, first came up by French critics who were exposed to a new wave of American movies after World War II, and the shifting tone in content and style made them form this new category. In America, those movies were simply called crime dramas or melodramas at that time, but they were significantly different in tone to the movies that came before. The starting point of the classic film noir time period is usually tied to John Huston's masterful 1941 debut movie, The Maltese Falcon, starring Humphrey Bogart. Though there are other movies that came before that can also be categorized as noir or proto-noir. But from 1941 onwards there were a ton of movies that fit the term. This classic period went on until the end 1950s. But what makes a film fit a category? Nowadays the most obvious characteristic is the black and white cinematography. And indeed the vast majority of movies from the classic period are black and white, though there are a few remarkable exceptions like Leave Her to Heaven or Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. There's also the term neo-noir, which categorizes movies that were heavily influenced by those old ones, and more often than not those are also in color. Movies like Taxi Driver, Mulholland Drive or Zodiac. Noir isn't a category that can be easily narrowed down, and there's a constant debate about what fits and what not. Noir is often defined by blurring lines between good and evil, anti-heroes, criminal milieus, hard-boiled detectives, femme fatales. Oftentimes there's a moral ambivalence. You will find more complex characters, cloudy motives, as well as heightened and more gruesome depictions of violence. Most noir films give the audience a feeling of insecurity and tension. The psyche of our protagonist, his inner life is darker as well and explored much more through the visuals and the music. There's much more to say, but I think this might give you a baseline. Now Ride the Pink Horse is certainly not one of the most known, but it always had a special place in my heart because of its enigmatic, weird and almost dreamlike atmosphere and the strange relationships our protagonist forms to the other characters of the film. It was written by Ben Hecht and Charles Lederer, two very prolific and acclaimed screenwriters of classic Hollywood, and it was based on a novel by Dorothy B. Hughes, who was a famous crime writer in the mid-20th century. The book was just released a year earlier in 1946, and there are some slight changes to the characters and overall story. The film was directed by Robert Montgomery, who also stars as the protagonist named Gagin. Montgomery is mostly known for his many acting roles, but he has also 5 directing credits under his belt. Ride the Pink Horse was his second, and I think best one, but his very first is more interesting from a historic perspective. In 1946 he adapted Raymond Chandler's detective novel The Lady in the Lake. By the way, many of Chandler's books were the source material for some of the most beloved noir movies, like Murder My Sweet or The Big Sleep. What is so special about Montgomery's Lady in the Lake is the idea to tell the story completely through the eyes of the protagonist Philip Marlowe. Now most films are told from the perspective of the protagonist, but Lady in the Lake goes one step further and decides to let you experience the whole movie through his eyes as well, meaning the entire film is using a first-person camera, the so-called subjective camera. Like in Ride the Pink Horse, Robert Montgomery also stars in that one, and yet you almost never see him except when he's looking at a mirror. Now, let's just say I don't think this experiment quite works. It takes away from the identification instead of amplifying it, and it also creates kind of a claustrophobic feeling while watching. There's a good reason only very few films have ever attempted this for a huge stretch of screen time. But now, finally back to Ride the Pink Horse. The film is set in a small rural New Mexico border town and it has a very exotic, mysterious feel to it. Our protagonist, who is listed in the opening credits as Lucky Gagin, is an outsider and he's being introduced in a marvelous 3.5 minute long continuous shot that shows him arriving at a local bus station and doing some rather weird things. There's no dialogue at all. Instead, we see him pocketing a gun in his jacket, putting a small note in a locker, buying and chewing some bubble gum, and then hiding the key to the locker with the gum behind a big area map. We have basically no idea what he's up to, and it will take quite some time until some information about his past, his motivation, and his actual plan are revealed. He's a man devoid of identity, and some of the villagers refer to him as the man with no place. Ride the Pink Horse has great pacing, and it moves along like that, ever increasing your interest in what's actually going on. Gagin is an army veteran and World War II has just ended. He's a man coming back to the life as a civilian, and like thousands like him in that time, he can't really go back to his old life. The theme of post-war disillusionment is explored in many noir movies. This isn't giving away too much, but Gagin's main goal is to avenge the death of his old wartime buddy. Robert Montgomery portrays him as a super rude, bitter and downright maltreating human being. Right after he arrived in the fictitious town of San Pablo, he meets the childlike woman Pilar, a very young, very innocent Mexican Indian girl, a truly unique and super memorable character played by Wanda Hendricks. From the first meeting and throughout the whole film, Gagin is an absolute dick to her. He's pushing her around, calls her sitting bull. At one point he even denies her looking human at all to him. And yet she shows him almost endless devotion. She's kind of his guardian angel, and the relationship is really strange and to many people probably hard to watch. I've read some reviews that describe Gagin as completely unlikable, but to me it's not really the point to feel particularly sympathetic towards him. But he's fascinating and interesting to watch. He's coming across as a hard-boiled and also lost soul, only that the people he meets won't just hand him over to his otherwise certain demise. Pilar deeply cares for him, but it's also not one of those situations where the man is super reserved and unfavorably and the woman deeply emotional. Pilar has a very stoic expression on her face. She clearly doesn't appreciate the way he treats her, yet she won't give up on him either. The dialogue is sharp and poignant, and though it's definitely not a comedy, I couldn't help but laugh at some of the mean remarks by Gagin. And without spoiling anything, the relationship will change quite a bit towards the end, and Pilar is much stronger than you might expect at first. An underlying message of the film points to the notion that the presumably weak are indeed the ones that show the most compassion, and are the ones who will save the people who are supposed to be also tough and untouchable. But the dialogue is also great in pretty much all other scenes, especially when Gagin is talking to Reds, a government agent played by Art Smith. He's another key player in what's going on, and there's a constant tension as well as mild appreciation, if not growing friendship. He reminded me quite a bit of Claude Rains' character in Casablanca. The antagonist, Frank Hugo, played by Fred Clark, is just as mysterious as our protagonist, and the film stalls his actual introduction quite a bit and also gives him this hearing aid that makes him instantly more memorable. At his side you get this film's version of a femme fatale, which adds some more spice to the mix, and fortunately it doesn't take too much weight in the overall story. And then there's the character of Panchal, played by the charming Thomas Gomez, who received an Oscar nomination as Best Actor in a Supporting Role for it. Like Pilar, Panchal comes from a completely different social background than Gagin, and his good nature makes him want to help Gagin as well. Without hesitating, he invites him to his small home, the Palace of Panchal, right next to where he operates his merry-go-round, which of course gives the movie its title. Later, he's even accepting a brutal beating in what has to be the most gruesome scene of the movie, so that Hugo's henchmen won't get to Gagin. Like I said, the opening credits introduce Gagin as Lucky Gagin, and he's only lucky because he found these great people. Fittingly, the story is also set during a Mexican fiesta in which Zozobra, the god of bad luck, is getting burned. The camera work, the mix of lights and shadows, and this whole enigmatic story are able to suck you right in. That some sets are clearly recognizable as sound stages only amplifies the dreamlike atmosphere the movie is able to implore. If you decide to give it a chance, watch it with all lights out in complete darkness. Basically how all movies are supposed to be watched, but maybe noir ones films even more so. Right Up in Course has great pacing overall, with the last act slightly being a little bit too slow for my taste. Of all the noir movies I have seen, Right Up in Course has always been one of the strangest and most intriguing. So in German I'd say, Right Up in Course ist ein starker Film, der dem Zuschauer nie alle seine Karten offenlegt. Durch eine unglaublich dichte, geheimnisvolle und exotische Atmosphäre, äußerst prägnante Schauspielleistungen, die geschliffenen Dialoge und ein tolles Tempo zieht er einen richtig in den Bann. I give Right Up in Course 8 out of 10. It's more like 8.1, but I don't do that.
I'll do it my way.
But it's stupid. So stupid.
Maybe.
Alright, that's it like always. Comment below and let me know what you think about Right Up in Course. And also, if you're familiar with film noir, what is your favorite one? You can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Letterboxd at TheJimmyCage. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe, whatever you like. And make sure you hit that bell for all I have to tell.